Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me back at B-Sides, or should I say the conference formerly known as B-Sides. This is my second time presenting here. This is my second time presenting here. And those with good memories and sharp eyes will notice a few things are different about my talk this year compared to last year. First and foremost, my version of Windows is now activated, so I consider that, yeah, progress right there. The tone of my talk has also changed somewhat compared to last year. So last year being my first time presenting at a security conference, my tone was kind of, go easy on me, please don't hurt me, be gentle, and I'll try to entertain you. So 1 year has passed, and now I'm brimming with confidence, maybe a little bit too much, and now my tone is one more of, come get some, right? Because if you don't agree with me by the time this talk is over, heaven help me, I will fight you. And when I say that, I mean it metaphorically, okay? Just to be clear. So anyway, bit about me. So typically bios suck, and I would tell you to just, read the handout or whatever, but Dylan, accidentally left me off the official pamphlet. And the reality is it doesn't behoove me to engage in an opportunity of shameless self-promotion. So I'm actually here in two capacities. First and foremost, I am the IT security guy at Merlin. So for those who aren't familiar with Merlin, we are the primary provider of internet and internet services for education in Manitoba. It's a great job. In this role, I get to wear every single InfoSec hat imaginable. I do forensics, I do incident response, pen testing, policy, the whole shebang. But I'm also here as the co-founder of a small IT firm called Flying Fortress IT, which I co-founded with that Amazon guy, Mike Himbo. And together we try to offer cloud and security expertise to small and medium businesses in Manitoba. So if you or someone you love is a small or medium-sized business in Manitoba and needs some help kind of bridging that skill gap, you're not quite big enough to justify having a full-time IT security guy, come on, give us a call. We'll see what we can do to help you. Okay, so I'm here to talk about passwords. Now, I love passwords. Wait, no. I hate passwords, but I love talking about passwords. I love studying passwords. I find passwords absolutely fascinating. Now, when I say that, that sounds really, really weird to most, normal people. Now, there's probably not too many normal people here, but just in case nobody's on board, I love the study of passwords, if you will, passwordology. So why is this so fascinating? Well, I got a little example here. So if we take a typical, traditionally good password, like Steve Ballmer's old password, developers. It's traditionally good, right? It's 11 characters long, uppercase, lowercase, and it even has a special character, right? According to passwordmeter.com, it's 65% or strong, and it'll take 97 years to crack, right? Yeah, we all know that's bullshit, right? Any pen tester worth his or her salt will tell you, it's a really crappy password, right? It's a common-ish dictionary word, even in the RawQ password league database, right? And it follows a lot of common patterns, right? So sure, it has an uppercase, but it's the first letter, right? And sure, it has a special character, but it's an exclamation mark and it's at the end of the word, right? Whereas whenever somebody adds a special character to their password, it's almost always an exclamation mark and it's almost always at the end, right? So the upshot is that if a hacker is trying to break this password, they're probably going to try the word developers, and they're probably going to try capital D developers with an exclamation mark. But what I find super interesting is if I take that password and I make one tiny little change to it, and I move the exclamation mark over a couple of characters, suddenly I've taken a really crappy password and made it substantially stronger. And I'm still not claiming it's a great password, but it is a lot better than the one before. And that's mostly because it's just no longer following those common patterns of putting an exclamation mark at the end, right? It's kind of breaking the mold in that sense. Now, I do believe there are modules in Hashcat that'll still get that. There's one that'll like move characters around and shit like that. So it's still crackable, but it's still substantially better than it was before. So this is why I find passwords or passwordology super interesting, right? It's this confluence of human psychology and computer science and mathematics all coming together for this really interesting field, passwordology. The MS Paint skills are on full display here today. All right. So I'm here to talk about passwords. What about passwords am I here to say? I'm not here to tell you how to choose a good password, heaven help me. We've beaten that correct horse to death many, many times. I'm also not here to tell you that passwords are dead. Usually if somebody tells you or tries to tell you that passwords are dead, they're probably a sales engineer. And as we all know, sales engineers are the scum of the earth. So, not making that claim. In fact, reports of the death of passwords have been grossly overstated. Quite famously in 2011, IBM claimed that by 2016, 5 years later, we'd never be using a password again, right? But last time I tried logging into ibm.com/support, what do you need? Oh, it's a password, right? So good call on that one, IBM. What's that? Wishful thinking. It's aspirational, I guess, is what they're going for. There's also some noise about passwordless solutions, but when you kind of dig into them, you realize they're not actually passwordless. What they're typically doing is using another authenticator, like say an email account as your authenticator. So they're kind of almost more password outsourcing than passwordless. And the advantage here is convenience rather than actually improving the security of passwords. All right, so specifically, I'm here to talk about password rotation, or more specifically, why password rotation is bad. Or most specifically, why mandatory frequent password rotation, which is to say the password rotation that exists in pretty much every corporate environment I've ever had to deal with, not only doesn't improve an organization's security, it actually actively inhibits it. It makes it substantially worse. Now, I hope this is a sample of the InfoSec community in Winnipeg. Probably a lot of you are already on board this train, but maybe some of you aren't. And even if you are, this is the sort of thing that bears repeating, or it's something you can go and tape back to your IT admins and sysadmins and say, hey, we should stop doing this because A, B, C, etc. So a little bit of background. Password rotation has been around basically forever, or at least since 1985, which is basically forever in terms of internet time. The Department of Defense published a guide advocating password rotation, and it kind of took off from there. Nobody's really sure why it exploded the way it did, but it just kind of became standard practice from there. And it stayed that way for more than 20 years until some fellow by the name of Gene Spafford at Sirius published it's actually a really great article questioning, hey, why are we doing this? This doesn't actually help us when we stop and think about it. And as anybody going against the common orthodoxy of the day, he was met with swift, vitriolic, and extremely ignorant pushback. A really good example is LOPSA, the League of Professional System Administrators, who have an extremely pretentious title, published an article in defense of password expiration that really demonstrated this pushback. So, why is password rotation not actually helpful? So the main rationale behind why we do mandatory frequent password rotation is to limit the amount of time that an attacker can use stolen credentials to access your network. Now this sounds like a great idea, right? Like if you're constantly rotating your password or your passwords, an attacker can only use a stolen password to access your network for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever, right? And that makes a lot of sense in 1985, when attackers' techniques were, very slow, very manual, and it took a lot of time to do things, right? And they tended to just kind of stick around the network and not really mess things about. But in the modern day, in 2018 here, that doesn't make so much sense anymore, right? Like, how long are you really comfortable leaving an attacker have access to your network? Are you comfortable with an attacker being on your network for 30 days? I'm sure not. I'm not comfortable having an attacker on my network for 1 minute, right? How long does it take to establish persistence or leave a backdoor, right? Or deploy CryptoLocker? Sure as hell doesn't take 30 days to do that anymore. And in fact, a couple of former NSA TAO operatives have come out and said, yeah, in our experience hacking other nation states, password rotation has never inhibited us even once. And the idea being that if you've changed your password, you're now safe, it doesn't really help too much when the people are doing it all the time, right? And because when somebody changes their password, if I still have their old password, I have this huge insight into what they typically choose for a password. I know what their new password looks like, or I have a good idea. So a very simple example, right? If a user's old password was Red Honda 11, how much do you want to bet their next password is Red Honda 12 or Red Honda 111 or whatever, right? And you might say, well, we could put rules in place. This is often the approach to fixing these sorts of problems, is, well, we can put password generation rules in place so that a certain number of characters have to be different. well, okay, then the user will just choose a password that's like orange Toyota 11, right? Or it still follows some sort of predictable pattern. And ultimately, just in a larger sense, making users change passwords frequently just makes it harder for them to remember passwords, right? Users hate changing their passwords frequency. I don't know if you guys have spoken to a user recently. It's a terrible thing, and I don't blame them. I hate doing it myself. And ultimately, they choose passwords that are shorter and easier to remember and are therefore easier to guess and crack for an adversary. This has been known for a long time. Adams and Sass back in 1999 published a paper about this, but it was largely ignored and we just kind of trudged on with it. And it will also lead to more frequent occurrences of other problems like writing down passwords or storing them insecurely in text files or spreadsheets and that sort of thing. It also puts a drain on your help desk, right? Because people will be more likely to phone in saying, hey, I forgot my password because I had to change it 2 days ago and I don't remember what I changed it to. So ultimately, it's much better to have longer, more secure passwords that never or rarely expire, right? And it also gives you an opportunity to sell that, right? If you disable password rotation but up your complexity requirements, right, people are less likely to complain because they only have to remember a password once now. And the reality is password rotation is it's computationally expensive for users. Now, users aren't stupid. Well, okay, some users are stupid, but most users aren't stupid. I kind of resist that narrative. However, I do think users are a little bit lazy. And when I say that, I don't mean that disparagingly. I actually kind of, respect that, right? Because if you're a little bit lazy, you're less likely to waste time doing something pointless or worthless. So it actually has value to an organization if your users are just a little bit lazy. And because they're lazy and they have to deal with all these requirements and advice, they take shortcuts, right? This is the reality. But it's not just that it doesn't help. My argument is stronger than that. I'm saying password rotation actually makes things worse, right? So if your users are changing their passwords every 30 days, well, what else changes every 30 days? I don't know, maybe the month changes every 30 days, or for 90 days, maybe the seasons change every 90 days. And so I've seen this time and again, you see a lot of common repeated patterns, right? You'll see a lot of users who use passwords like November 2018 or fall 2018, or other passwords following a very, very similar pattern. And these are traditionally good passwords. They're long, they have capital letters, some of them have special characters even, right? Most password requirements are met with these really crappy passwords. So in my experience, in admittedly somewhat limited experience, I found that about 2 to 3% of users in an environment where they're forcing password rotation on a regular basis will have passwords that fall into a pattern somewhat like this, fall or November 2018. Now, 2 to 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but in an organization of just 100 users, you're almost guaranteed that at least one of them will have a password that fits this pattern, right? And if that user has VPN access, well, there's a way into your organization from the outside. In fact, this is such a common problem that I've run into time and again. I made a tool for generating passwords that fit this pattern, depending on what time of year it is that I'm doing the engagement. You're welcome to check it out. I called it Password Vortex because I have a flair for the dramatic, and you can download it, check it out. Please don't make fun of my terrible coding skills. Now, as I've just ragged on password rotation for the past 5-10 minutes, I will begrudgingly admit that it has a little bit of an upside. And that is, if you're forcing password rotation, it does cause users to, if they're reusing their password from their social accounts for their professional accounts, it does kind of cause that to eventually kind of diverge and sort of lose sync. And that's good. I mean, users aren't supposed to reuse passwords, but they do. And so this does help with that. But we still have the same problem as before, right? If their social media password is Red Toyota 11, then what's a good chance that their corporate password is something like Red Toyota 12. So if, as an adversary, I gain their social media password through a leak or social engineering or whatever, again, I have a huge hint into what that user's corporate password probably looks like. I also think there's maybe a better way of dealing with this problem, but I'll come back to that. So this kind of persisted after 2006 until about 2009, 2010. That's when we really started to see some pushback from experts in the community. And it kind of started with the first academic research was published in 2010 by a bunch of researchers. Oh, shoot, I forgot where they were from. Called The Security of Modern Password Expiration. And the fact that we finally had quantifiable academic research really went a long way into allowing the experts to push back against this perceived wisdom. So Bruce Schneier started weighing in, other experts, Sands weighed in on it and said, hey, we should stop doing this. Lori Craner, who is pretty awesome, although I think I got her name wrong, a former professor of computer science and chief technologist at the FTC, has been quite vocal about this as well. And in fact, shortly after she started her role as the chief technologist of the FTC, somebody in charge of the Twitter account posted a tweet saying, hey, remember to change your passwords frequently. And she had to step in and kind of lay the smackdown on that one. The GCHQ, they changed their tune back in January of 2016. And NIST followed suit about a year later in 2017. So even though these big names like Bruce Schneier and SANS and NIST and GCHQ are all saying, hey, don't do this anymore, there are a lot of examples of organizations who know better, who ostensibly deal in security, who are still recommending that we do this. Places like Manage Engine, the Pi, Devolutions, Networks, all of these are firms that deal with security, and some of them quite humorously. Devolutions deals in password management and privileged access management, still doesn't know better, right? These guys are supposed to be experts and they're still recommending this. I got to the second page of Google results and I got tired of doing this, so the reality is you can find no shortage of firms that are still recommending this practice. Microsoft seems to be of two minds about this. Maybe not quite atypically. They officially say not to use mandatory password rotation. In fact, it was some Microsoft researchers were some of the early ones leading the charge against it. But even though they officially say that, the default value for maximum password age on a domain controller is 42 days, right? That's still the default. And if you dig into the Microsoft documents, it flat out says, best practices set maximum password age to between 30 and 90 days. So maybe it's a symptom of being a large organization like Microsoft, but the right hand seems to not know what the left hand is doing. So I consider this the most egregious example. The Center for Internet Security publishes a lot of great documents, benchmarks and security controls. They're still on board. The mandatory password rotation is a good idea train, and they don't seem to want to get off. I'm not sure why, but hopefully that'll change soon. And of course, you can't look to your governments as examples of what to do with passwords. A certain federal government, whom I will not name, but we're all very familiar with, still recommends or requires a minimum of 8-character passwords that needs to be changed every few months. Again, a certain provincial government, 7 characters, 90 days. Same with a certain municipal government, is also 7 characters and 90 days. I singled out the government of BC here. For also having a bad policy, but I wanted to mention them because they will outright publish this information. They have a great set of documents. If you're looking to create a security standard for your organization, they have great documents, good for modeling after, except for the fact that they have really poor password requirements. All right, time for a quick story. So I was working with this one organization, great organization. They really got their head on straight. They're trying to improve their security. So they brought me in to kind of do a pen test and assessment and help them out. And as part of the pen test, I was able to leverage the fact that they were using mandatory password rotation to crack their perimeter and get onto the network. So afterwards, we're doing the after action, the debriefing, and I bring this up and I explain to them why this is a bad thing and how I was able to leverage it. And they said, okay, Travis, we hear what you're saying. We understand the problem. We'll change it from 30 days to 60-day maximum password rotation. It's just like, no, that's, you didn't understand it at all. Eventually they came around, but that just kind of goes to illustrate just how ingrained this idea that password rotation is a necessary thing, right? That even when faced directly with the evidence, the idea was just, let's just make it longer, right? That doesn't really solve the problem. So the natural question is, well, if 30 days or 60 days or 90 days is far too short, well, how long should it be? Should I do it at all? Should I never change my passwords? Well, and the obvious answer is, if you suspect you've been compromised, change your passwords. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. Some people say, do 1 year, do 2 years. And this helps. It avoids some of the problems of having those common patterns or where users are choosing really, really weak passwords. Pardon me. But it's kind of like, what's the point then? Because remember, the main reason is that we want to limit the amount of time an attacker can use stolen credentials on a network, right? And 1 year is a hell of a long time to let an attacker muck about on your network. If you pressure me and say, how long should it be, Travis? I kind of go, I don't really know. Because even though I just talked about how password rotation is terrible, if you came up to me and told me that you were using a password, the same password for 10, 15 years, I'd probably go, you might want to change that, right? Even I have a hard time letting go of that idea. So can we do better than password rotation? Yes, absolutely. It's called account monitoring, user-based analytics, and all that sort of thing. What that actually looks like, way outside of the scope of this talk. Multi-factor authentication also would go a long way to improving this problem. We don't really need to rotate passwords if we have multi-factors. Yeah, that guy likes it. The problem, of course, is that multi-factor authentication doesn't really work in Windows Active Directory environments. But again, that's another issue way outside the scope of this talk. So one idea that I like, that I'm kind of kicking around tentatively, is the idea of password audits. And that is you have a professional come in, or you do this yourself, and take your password database, securely of course, and you try to crack the passwords contained therein. And basically you're doing the same thing to your password database that a modern adversary would. You're using the same tools and techniques and identifying which passwords are likely to fall in the event of a compromise. And the idea is to kind of try to pick off the lowest hanging fruit, figure out which passwords are actually weak according to objective metrics instead of just guessing. Now the idea, it's very important that we want to use this as a teaching moment. We don't want to shame users for having a strong password, but it does give us the ability to concretely say, hey, you have a weak password because you did, you're using a dictionary word. Please don't do that. Here's how a better way of choosing a password, right? And the idea is you make sure that you're communicating with your users when doing this. Now this is, a lot of organizations may not be familiar with how to crack passwords, or they don't have the resources to build their own password cracking rig, which can cost a lot of money. But you can do this with AWS, and maybe somebody can give you a hand with that if you need. So I do have some bonus slides, but I don't think I have time for bonus slides. No, I do not have time for bonus slides. So we'll we'll go into the questions. You were first.
Thank you for informing me and hopefully my IT that my idea of using password one for everything is a great idea.
Yes, I think you may have missed the point of my talk there, but I thank you for that.
Is there any benefit to using password rotation if you're using a password management service like Dashlane or KeyPass, where it is generating cryptographically strong passwords that the user effectively never actually needs to memorize because they're managed through an extra service?
Yeah, I can see some value in that because you avoid the pitfalls of having them choosing weak passwords or following common patterns. But how much would that really help? Well, dubious. I mean, if a password gets outright stolen through a keylogger, I guess, and with an automated service, I guess you can set it up to rotate the passwords daily or whatever, right? So I would see that as having some value, and because it's basically free with an automated service, I guess, yeah, turn it on. Why not?
As for password being stolen, monitoring is pretty much the best solution.
Okay.
And as for finding out if your own credentials have been schemed or not, there's have-I-been-owned.com.
Yes.
So you can go there to verify if you may need to change the password.
You also have a link you can use to check against NTLM hashes or pre-check.
Yes, rainbow tables, also good times. I'm being kicked off the stage. Sorry, Muzz.